Well, the first thing you'll probably notice is I've completely ignored the title of what my speech was supposed to be about. And that's because, oh, can I have the little thing to flick?
It's up there on the side.
Okay, thanks. I think one of the interesting things is that you kind of get lost in all of what data is about and how to get the data in a particular form. And actually, a lot of this is just how you're going to use it to drive value. And that's basically the whole message of what I'm going to talk about. Three things. Who are Virgin Insight? You've probably got no idea, and that's on purpose. But I'll tell you a little bit about that. Then some observations that we've got about big data. And finally, what we do about that in order to make that work. So just to start, and this is a little bit different, you see Virgin up there, and you're like, a bit like Sky IQ. Is that Virgin? Is that part of Richard Branson's thing? I don't really know. So when you see something like this, you probably begin to get the sense that, yeah, we think about this quite differently. This is about putting customers at the heart of a business because that will drive business success. And what Virgin Insight is an internal marketing and strategy consultancy for the Virgin Group. And we work across all of the Virgin companies in the UK. What this is about, though, is enabling people to make better decisions to drive more profit and more cash. But the way of doing that is to satisfy customers. So one of the things about Virgin is that you may well know is the brand value. So you'll think about Richard Branson, but you'll also then think about some of the brand values, those being, you know, fun and good value. But I guess one of the overriding ones is that we're the customer champion. You go into a market, you understand what the inadequacies are in a market, and you change those. And that's what really this kind of stuff allows you to do, but on a really detailed and really positive way for customers. So just a bit of background about me. So I've been at Virgin for about 12 years. My job was starting up new Virgin companies. So I've started up Virgin Mobile in the US and Canada, and Virgin Health Bank, an umbilical called Stem Cell Bank, go figure, and then was doing the corporate strategy, so which industries you should be in, where we should be in the world. And then in 2008, start up Virgin Insight. And that seemed like a bit of a weird kind of move. And I quite like the fact that it was an intuitive thing that big data was going to be, which we weren't calling it at that time, but that doing this kind of stuff is really interesting and actually really powerful. But I quite like the fact that it was the intuition that took me there. There's a certain level of irony there. We've been working with the Virgin companies for a little while. There's a Virgin Active downstairs, which quite liked seeing that on the way in. So we've got all of the transactions of, so every gym visit that anyone is doing in a Virgin Active gym in the UK, where people fly, where they go on holiday, who they fly with. Similarly for Virgin Holidays. Virgin Media, this is incredibly powerful data. We don't have all of the ISP data or the viewing data, not just yet. That is an incredibly and immensely powerful data set. And then financial services. And we'll come back to these two and the concept of data exhaust. But they're producing a lot of data exhaust, which becomes very powerful used in the right way. And Virgin Trains, not quite RIP just yet, but that's a very disappointing. Just as an aside there. So when it was British Rail in 13, so 13 million people travelled on Virgin on the same line. The year just gone, 31 million people travelled on it. So more than 2.5 times, or about 2.5 times as many people. And at the same time, it's the most satisfied customer base of any rail operator in the UK. So not only have you got 2.5 times as many people on the same line, you've also got them the most happy. So I'm kind of a bit disappointed by the fact that that's gone, but you know, ho-hum. This is another interesting one, Virgin K. You probably haven't heard of that. That's delivering services within the NHS, under the NHS brand, free to the end user at the point of delivery. It's gone from kind of about 800 grand turnover 3 years ago to about 175 million. So that's going quite nicely. We've done some very interesting stuff there. So there's a thing called the hospital episodes statistics, the HES data set. That's 700 million appointments that people have kept at the at hospitals. And from that data, we've been able to identify where the best dermatological clinics should be throughout the UK, because you can work out the market size of usage of dermatology services, and then where there are inefficiencies in the market, and then using GIS tools, you can then work out exactly where those clinics should be. So really, really interesting stuff. I've put this 80 million figure in. To be honest, that's what we've tracked in terms of the last 3 or 4 years. And that's primarily getting the Virgin companies to work together, because although you may think these guys are all individual companies that are run by Richard Branson in some big red house somewhere, it's not actually like that. They're all fiercely independent, very entrepreneurial people. And so the only way that we can exist is by delivering them value. And they don't have any obligation to use Virgin Insight, and they can walk at any stage, which puts a little bit of pressure on us, given that's our captive market there. But we tracked about 80 million. You'll see a bit later on that actually the value is much, much more than that if you take into account some of the strategic decisions. But we're running at about 50 million of incremental value, and that's primarily cross-sell and upsell that's been delivered over time. Which sounds like a big number, but I really just think we're scratching the surface. So what are we? Well, we divide into 3 different areas in my team. Data and analytics. To be honest, I want to do as little data as possible, because I regard that as hygiene, which is probably not music to the ears of any vendors in the room. I'll come back to that a bit later on. But the key thing that's interesting is analytics. You actually want to understand this stuff to make business decisions, which is strategy. So we've got a bunch of people from the consultancy houses, and then into marketing. Because to be honest, if you don't realize any of this stuff, you're not seeing real value. And if you're not seeing real value, then you don't want to do it. So a bit like some people said earlier on, I think it was, I don't know who it was actually, but the idea that there's a sort of 7-figure number associated with a software implementation where you're going to spend 3 or 4 years getting it in place is just a terrible way to do this. I like the EMI thing. Keep it cheap, get it out there, see if it works, then do it again. And if you can do that and prove value, then you see more and more and more stuff happening. And so what we're trying to do is gain valuable customer insight and then reveal actionable opportunities. So an action is kind of really key. Shit needs to happen, and then you'll prove value. And once you prove value, then people love it. So that's kind of the context of who we are. Just on big data, and again, an aside on big data. Bit irritating, the term, a bit like Web 2.0. But actually, you read online, and it's actually a very current thing, a bit like data scientists as well. You kind of get tied up in this. However, I think it's quite important if you attach yourself to something that people are engaged with, and they will be over the next 2 or 3 years, and ultimately it will just come as part of business as usual. There'll be a lot of money going to this, there'll be a lot of hype about it, it'll be high profile within organisations, and therefore actually shit will happen around it, and that's great. So it's worth, I didn't think this, but I'm now thinking it's worth kind of attaching yourself to that name, because you'll just get dragged along with it. But it's been around for ages, to be honest. Traditional sources are things like credit bureaus, so your Experian, Equifax. That's been around for ages. Health stuff, I remember, I've already said about the hospital episode stuff, but obviously there's lots of big pharma out there doing big data. Chemical engineering, I studied chemistry at university, and in 89 to 93. And there, you already had people doing protein modelling. I mean, pretty archaic stuff now, but that kind of stuff was already happening, so that was around. And then all of the kind of meteorology, even if you had to do all of this, the grid stuff that was done in order to get it processed, still lots of meteorology stuff's been around for a while. The big thing, I think, for business, which is fascinating, and what we've just seen, telco is an important thing, but there's data exhaust. So data exhaust is where you're doing your main business, but as a result of doing that business, other data is produced that is interesting. So financial services is a key one. Interesting, regulation requires you to keep all of this data for a long period of time. It gets stored somewhere. This is kind of in the early 90s. And then someone says, oh, well, maybe we can use that. And so they start using it. And actually, the financial services, you know, Capital One being the poster child of it, using in DM pretty early on, doing amazing stuff in terms of segmentation, targeting, and one-to-one marketing. And that's just because they had the data and they were beginning to start to use it. Telco media, I mean, yes, you've got all of the GPS data with telco, but to be honest, all of those core records that are there, they're very powerful things. If you use them, you understand, you know, just think about it. If someone looked at your phone and they'd know how many friends you've got, they know how often what your relationship with your mother is like. They know when you're buying a new house, because they can track when you're going to be calling a mortgage provider. The kind of depth and breadth of information there. Now, we'll come on to what our view of how to use data and data as a force for good a bit later on, but you can do some amazing stuff with this. Now, whether you should or not and whether you can use it is an entirely different question. EPOS, so Tesco's the grandmasters of this. Dunnhumby creating Tesco Club Card in conjunction with the EHS brand a little while ago. Terry Leahy championing that, becoming chief exec. And then those guys doing a brilliant job, and then taking that model of JVing around the world with the leading grocer in the world and now other forms of retail. Really powerful stuff, and they've been doing that for ages. And lots of operational stuff kicking around. So, you know, I always think, God, think of the complexity of FedEx or UPS or even the Royal Mail. Those guys putting that many packages around the world, really, really complex stuff. So for me, big data, been around for a while. This is really what we're talking about there. And to be honest, when you get into this stuff here, that's where it really kicks off. Doing the click-steering analysis for how people are using a website becomes, you know, that's a lot of information very quickly. If you're capturing where the mouse hovers are, using some of the new, the newer stuff, or, you know, what people are entering, and then doing the bridge between on and offline, that becomes quite complex quite quickly and produces a lot of stuff. One of the other things, though, is this this idea of the call logs. You know, the training and for training purposes and so on. As your voice being recorded, if you go to someone like Verint and do the transcription of that, and then use text analytics on top of that, you can extract loads of stuff. And to be honest, that's probably richer than going to social media and have a bunch of random people telling you a bunch of random stuff about your brand. Now, it's quite good for understanding competitors. It's also quite good to put something on the CEO's dashboard so that when they wake up in the morning, they can look at it and go, oh, look, how very interesting about my brand. But somehow it's a bit sexier. But the reality is there's all sorts of stuff that's out there that's available. So this stuff has been around for a while, but the difference is you've got technology you can actually bring to bear on it. However, that technology, a lot of the guys outside, and if you're in here, then you're in here, they've looked at the stack and built that stack. So you've got HP, you've got, you know, the IBMs and the SAPs and so on. And they're buying all of these companies, you know, whether it's data like Asta, we saw that Teradata's got that, you know, Netezza with IBM, Vertica for HP, all of these databases have just been hoovered up. It's also happening in the BI front end. They're getting hoovered up as well as the stacks go, God, we really need that solution now. The issue is there's commoditization going on. So these things look very, very similar. You know, if you go out and speak to Action, Cognitio, and Teradata out there, they will tell you very, very similar things that are so similar that unless you are a CTO of an organization, you're going, I don't even know where to start. The reality is a lot of this is getting commoditized. We've just looked at all of the BI tools, and it really is quite hard to tell them apart. And actually some of them will admit that as well. And some of them are just copying each other. For the best thing. So that is a commoditization is occurring. You've then got the clouds. You've got the guys from Amazon outside have a 60% market share, so they're pretty big boys in this area. But you throw everything in the cloud, you don't really care what it sits on. You haven't got any visibility of it, and you don't care. And then the final bit is open source. So you've got the kind of free tools like R and Hadoop. You've actually got things, and I was talking to the SaaS guys out there as well, you've got WPS. I don't know whether anyone is using that, but WPS is essentially a SaaS clone, although that's not how the European court decided that it would class it. WPS is about a tenth the cost of SaaS, but does the same thing. And if anyone wants to chat about whether they should transition across, then come and have a chat with me. We found it being pretty straightforward to do. You can use all of your models there. But SaaS are the leaders in this and are brilliant, but they are getting caught up. And then when you've got R, which is actually free, where there's an open source community where people are building this stuff there and making it available freely, it's amazing. So the stack itself and all of this is getting a little bit commoditized and perhaps a little bit... I don't see there being a huge amount of value for the stack providers in the long term, but they will continue to buy companies that are small and innovative and hoover them up, because they have to have a point of difference, and they're not able to produce that, a bit like Big Pharma. You need innovation to come from outside. But is that really where the value is? And my assumption here is no. This is hygiene. For any organisation, you need the data to be in a particular, held somewhere, clean. So you've got Trillium cleaning it, or you've got Informatica loading it, whatever. You've got all of those data sources. But the reality is all of that is hygiene. And what we've just seen is actually how you use it. That's where the value comes from. So what type of value? Well, I've just picked a few here. These aren't... the middle bit will refer a little bit to Virgin, but Tesco talked about already using this stuff on a day-to-day basis to make decisions about ranging, about promotions, about store planning, about competitor spiking for new store openings. All of that stuff is just bread and butter for those guys, and they've been using it for 15 years. I saw an Ocado presentation, which was pretty good. I shop at Ocado, so I quite like it. But it brings up stuff. It brings up suggestions for me, particularly on the checkout, of stuff that I've either missed because actually it's looked back in my purchase cycle and seen that I actually haven't put toilet paper for a while, and I probably run out. So it's just prompting me on that kind of stuff. It's also doing a good job at cross-selling. So it's looking at all of the other people who, the collaborative filtering like Amazon. They do a good job. They're using this data to optimize their business and driving value from it. And they're kind of yes, you have to have all of that infrastructure in place. Those guys are also quite cool. They've got, their warehousing is really complicated. You've got to get all of this stuff. They've got 2 warehouses now. They had 1, and they were delivering it all within the M25. You've really got to get it right for that. So using data for that. And Arcadia, those guys are doing some, relatively simple and straightforward stuff, but optimizing the purchase pathway for the checkout. That's pretty interesting. And that drives real value. You're improving the customer experience, driving value, and therefore improving the bottom line. And that's why you're doing this stuff. The middle thing becomes more strategic. So a couple of examples there that I've put up. We looked at Lloyd's TSB and where the 632 branches that came up. And if anyone is from Co-op in the audience, then I apologise, but those were terrible branches. If you know where your current customers are, your potential customers are, and you do drive time analysis around all of those branches, which you scrape off the web, which we were able to do very quickly, what that allows you to do is to determine whether these are going to be high traffic areas and driving volume for your customer base. And the answer was no, it won't. Now, you may buy it for different reasons. You may buy a portfolio of customers and branches in order to get a market share. And that's not a bad reason. But if you want those branches to be performant, then don't buy those ones. Conversely, a Sporter, Virgin Active bought a Sporter. Virgin Active's I think it's either the first or second largest. Oh no, it's the second largest gym chain after Fitness First in the world now. So they've done a pretty good job. But they're buying they bought a Sporter in the UK, and we did some work pre the acquisition to understand where what their potential customer base was going to look like, and what the volume opportunities were, and then from there we've gone all the way through some due diligence work, some competition commission work. and then post that also, then integration work, looking at where they should be spending their CapEx. So we were using the NPS survey that they had, the verbatims that they captured. They hadn't looked at those verbatims. We used text analytics to go through those and understand the performance in various different categories in each gym. So was the pool performing well? Was the changing rooms performing well? And so on. On that basis, you could work out where you should spend the CapEx for a rebrand of each of the gyms. So that, I mean, that's quite exciting, really quite interesting stuff. And we've done deep dives on the back of that as well, doing research to individuals and tying the behavioural patterns right the way through to claimed attributes in terms of interest or worldview. And another nice one there is the retail partners. So Virgin Holidays is quite a nice one. They were an indirect brand, so they sold about 5 years ago. They sold about half of their holidays via the likes of Thomas Cook, so travel agents. They have completely transformed their model to be a direct model, and that direct model is now. They've opened 100 stores in the last 5 years, and we help them with the geolocation of all of those. That's turning over 200 million a year now. So it's really, you put a store in a good place and you sell a lot of stuff. It's brilliant. And they've got a brilliant model as well. It's a store within a store. They're in Debenhams, House of Fraser, and Tesco's. And so they've negotiated that extremely well. But ultimately, this is about using big data, or any kind of data, to be honest, to make good decisions, to make customers happier. And ultimately, then that means you make more money. But it's really about making decisions, and they can be real-time decisions. And if you need real-time data, then you make real-time decisions. Most of what I'm talking about here is actually we use an analytical data set. So we take the data from all the companies on a monthly basis rather than on a daily or real-time basis. And you can do a lot of stuff with that. You really can. And you don't need to spend much money to do that. And one other point of observation, a lot of people get all excited about how their data is going to be amazingly valuable, not just to them, but to the whole world. And they can monetize it, and they can sell it, and it's brilliant. That's not really true on the whole. Generally, the people whose data it's most valuable for. Actually, there's one set of people for whom it's more valuable, and that's your competitors. But if you're taking your data and trying to sell it to someone else, then it's unlikely. I don't want to know how many women wash their hair in the UK with a particular brand. It's just not relevant for me. There are some instances where, particularly that data exhaust stuff, so Dunnhumby selling back up to the CPG guys, all of the data that's generated in Tesco's, fantastic, £50 million business for stuff that is being produced, which they're analysing and getting paid to analyse. Now, they revenue share that with Tesco's, and ultimately Tesco's have bought them. But wow, what a great business. And there are other ones as well. Nectar are doing the same thing, obviously. But it needs to be unique. So there need to be barriers to entry where it can't be got anywhere else. It needs to be quite broad, and it needs to be useful. And useful is really, really important. And the other thing about data generally, and if you look at Axiom or Experian or CACI, they've all done segmentations. The reason they've done segmentations is you can build that once and you can sell it many times. And it's useful because you can do targeting with it. So we actually buy all of Experian's data, all 600 different variables, and also CACI's, and then we'll do any kind of segmentations and slice and dice with that because it's interesting, but it depends what the business question is. If you just buy their segmentation product, so Mosaic or Acorn or Personix or anything like that, you are only going to be able to use that as a pretty blunt instrument. Not to say it's not valuable and not useful, and I hope you are using it in different ways, but I would say that our view generally, and we've had a conversation with most of the Virgin companies about, oh, we can sell this data, can't we? Well, no, you can't. Virgin Media probably being the massive exception to that. So how do we approach this? We think about it, these decisions, in I think 4 different ways. The first 3 are the customer journey, so acquiring customers, retaining customers, and driving business growth. And if you know, on the presentation we just seen, that's the acquisition, that's the churn, and that's the revenue there. So it's the same story. We don't really look at cost. We have done some customer lifetime value measuring for a number of the Virgin company products, actually, and then across customers. But it depends where you want to go down the P&L. So attributing cost down to an individual level is quite hard. The other thing is then identifying new opportunities. So buying new companies, doing due diligence on that. And you know, the private equity guys are using quite a lot of this data to either during the market assessment phase or the purchase phase as well. One thing that we find really important, and you won't be surprised about this either because it's Virgin, but one thing that we spent a lot of time on was thinking as Virgin Insight, what our brand values were. We've got 4 of them. This is one of them that we think is quite differentiating. And this is data as a force for good, which is unsurprisingly not massively dissimilar to Google's Don't Do Evil. But it is really important. So going back to that stuff, that PayPal stuff that I saw earlier, that we saw earlier on, it's interesting. They're looking inside people's bank accounts, essentially. It's not a bank account, but it'll evolve to that over time. And then they're communicating on the back of it. If you think about your bank account or your credit card spend and what you do, and then actually if stuff was being targeted to you, that might feel quite intrusive, and similarly to telco stuff. So the example that I've used previously is if someone is ringing up to a mortgage firm on the telco, and then on the mobile phone company, or even the fixed line company at Virgin Media, and then we know then they want a mortgage, and we've got mortgages at Virgin Money, and then we all of a sudden do an outbound call to them saying, I know you're in the market for a house. Would you like a mortgage? That is a bit spooky. You have a bond of trust with the consumers. And if you break that, you destroy your relationship. It's way, way, way more valuable than anything to do with the upsell, cross-sell potential. So you've got to respect that bond of trust. Now, if like Tesco's, you've got a club card, and essentially you've gone, I will give you my details, and you can track my details, and then you give me something back, which is value. Fine. You've made that's the bond of trust that you've done there. But if you start transgressing and using my data in ways that I don't expect, and that was the whole example with Form. I don't know whether anyone followed that, but Form was a pretty ugly thing where basically it was behavioral targeting using ISP data on a named basis, although they said it was anonymized. And all of the ISPs got together and then they got hammered, and now they're all a bit bruised about that. But you've got to use data as a force for good. The other thing that we think is really important, and it's quite weird to put this one up, but it is really important, is there's 2 axes to this. There's the matrix, and then there's the madmen. And it's very easy to forget that it's all about the numbers and go very rational. But it is a game of hearts and minds. You have to win both the mind first with all of this data stuff, but then you need to turn this into something that's compelling. Our audience is loyalty marketeers, acquisition marketeers, CRM managers, marketing directors, corporate strategy people, sales people. So those guys, to be honest, don't really give a shit about the data, what form it's held in, where it is. We want to democratize data, and that's one of the things that we're in the process of doing properly. But we know that people aren't going to discover this stuff by themselves unless they're super users. And if they're super users, they're analysts, and they're doing this stuff anyway, whether they've got the right set of data. So it's really important to not forget this, the Don Draper side of stuff, and making sure that stuff is really powerful. And actually, inspiring propositions itself is important. We found we did a suite of offers, and one year we did it as just a suite of offers. The following year we did it as a thank you and a present that was an exploding gift that said thank you. And we found that we got 10 times the amount of revenue by doing exactly the same offer but packaging it differently. So the emotional engagement is really, really important. Just some final kind of little thoughts to leave you before I close. One is, and I was really pleased to go in previous session about data visualizations. Actually, data visualization sounds like it's an important thing to do. It is important, but actually all you're trying to do is make this stuff accessible to people, and that's a nice way of doing it. So a table, a bar chart, a pie chart, people will turn off and go to sleep. It needs to look beautiful. You need to work out what the key message is and then actually use that message. Do you need real time? All the vendors outside will say you need real time because they'll sell you more stuff. But actually, do you really need real time? Now, if you are serving up adverts in real time online, then definitely you do. If you're doing next best action models, you do definitely need real time to serve this stuff up. But a lot of it, we're not doing this. Now, will we in the future? Of course we will. And the Virgin companies individually, those guys are doing it, but we're looking across the whole group. We don't need that at the moment. The third, overcome IT issues. Computer says no. It's a nightmare. And it really should be hygiene. And it's interesting hearing that analysts are nipping off and getting Hadoop and downloading that and doing it themselves because they want to circumvent all of this stuff. Doesn't surprise me that that's happening. But you've got to find a way around it, and what we're doing is, building it cheap and, slightly elastic band and sellotape. But actually, if you can do that stuff and prove value, you can get more money, you can go faster. We take a whole bunch of different data sources. So we've got from the Virgin companies about 50 different data sources coming in, but then beyond that, we're using market research data. We've got a panel of 50,000 people. We're linking that on a named basis and then anonymizing it. We're looking at a whole variety. We've got all of experience data, all of CACI. When you aggregate all of that stuff up, it becomes increasingly powerful. And clearly, we know how people use gyms. We know where they fly on holiday, all sorts of stuff like that as well. And then we've heard about this a little bit today, democratization of data, put it in the hands of people who are going to use it, let them use it, let them self-serve. It becomes quite frightening quite quickly because if you're an analyst in an organization, you live to deliver that stuff. But if you've then put all of that, if you've codified it once and you've pushed it out, you've lost all of your power and all of your control. But actually, what's happened is you've distributed it so you can do more interesting stuff in the future. So, to conclude, final slide. There's definitely money in them there hills. It's a good idea to be doing this. I am excited about this. But you've got to remember that it's about value. It's about customers and making them happy. And that's about making better business decisions. And then somewhere down the line over here is all of that stuff about IT, infrastructure, stack, all of those things. So I think that people are perhaps looking in the wrong place at the moment. That will change. It is a bit of a pain in the arse, all of that, or getting the data in the right format and being able to analyze it. But that will change over time. But if you focus on business value and how to drive change in the organization, and hearing stuff from eBay, hearing stuff from Orange, hearing stuff from PayPal, those kind of things, those use cases where you're seeing real changes, decisions leading to change, leading to value, that's where you're going to make a difference. And that's when this becomes really exciting and actually begins to change the world. And I'll leave it on that. Thank you.